My name is Carrie Lorig. I'm a doctoral student in school psychology and a research assistant for the Violent Extremism Research Group at Georgia State University. Today I'll be talking about an article my advisor, Dr. John Horgan, and I wrote with doctors Randy Borum, Claire Alali, and Todd Herrincole that is entitled Understanding and Preventing Violent Extremism in U.S. Schools. Our conceptual article is available and is published in the Journal of School Psychology. My email will be listed at the end of the presentation if you're interested in reading it and would like a copy. Today, I'm going to provide an overview of the problem of violent extremism in U.S. schools and discuss how researchers, practitioners, policymakers, and schools can begin to conceptualize violent extremist prevention. Violent extremism is on the rise in the United States. The FBI reports that over the last 10 years, domestic terrorism-related investigations have grown by a pretty astounding 357%. How is this rise reflected in our public schools? Schools are the third most common location for hate crimes in the United States, and the number of hate crimes reported in our schools have doubled in recent years. Black students were the most frequent victims of these offenses, followed by Jewish, LGBTQ, and Muslim students. Right here, you'll see a photo of a group of high school boys from Wisconsin. It's the state I grew up in, and they are making the Nazi salute in front of Wisconsin's state capitol building. These boys were attending high school prom when this photo was taken. I chose this photo because it illustrates some of the challenges related to having these conversations and addressing these issues in school contexts. Many Americans saw this photo and were alarmed by what they saw as an expression of Nazi ideology during a school-sanctioned activity. However, others saw this photo and felt that this was just a joke and that boys will be boys, and that the school was actually victimizing these students by taking disciplinary action against them. The public reaction to this photo brings me to my last point, which is that when we talk about this issue and what prevention looks like, we also have to recognize that youth are not the only ones who might be expressing ideas associated with violent extremism or thinking about recruitment potential in school buildings. Staff, parents, and other members of the community may also hold, express, or just be receptive to these ideas. Next, I'm going to provide a couple recent examples of violent extremism incidents in the U.S. that had ties to our public schools. Right here, we have a photo of the January 6, 2020 attack on the U.S. Capitol School building. 35% of all defendants who have been charged with crimes related to the January 6th attack had ties to violent extremism. That's about 280 individuals who had ties to 46 different extremist groups and movements in the United States. How does January 6th connect to our schools? I myself was doing a school psychology internship in a school district when January 6th happened. And I remember watching these events unfold on Twitter, which is now called X, when a colleague texted me and told me that a member of our school board from our district was allegedly attending these events. Since January 6th, it's been discovered that a small number of U.S. public school staff, including teachers, counselors, principals, and school board members, were among those who participated in the violence. Some of these school staff members who were involved in January 6th were fired, and some of them continue to work in schools today. The internet has, of course, changed what violent extremism recruitment looks like and how ideas associated with violent extremism are spread. The teachers I talk to are concerned about the way young boys, for example, are talking about Andrew Tate and the misogynistic ideas he spreads on social media. There are also violent online groups that exclusively target youth through the internet and coerce or blackmail them into acts of self-harm or violence. Right here, you'll see a picture of Nex Benedict, an Indigenous non-binary student who died by suicide the day after they were attacked by 3 students at their school. Like many LGBTQ+ students in the US, NEX experienced persistent school-based bullying related to their gender identity. However, NEX also attended school in Oklahoma, where many school community members and state officials, including the state superintendent, adapted the violent, right-wing, anti-LGBTQ rhetoric espoused by an online TikTok account called Libs of TikTok. Chaya Raychek, who runs this account, was appointed to Oklahoma's state library board despite never living in the state. And many have argued that Nex's death illustrates the dangerous consequences of her social media influence on public schools. Another important question to ask is, how do school shootings fit into this issue? School shootings and violent extremism are both forms of targeted violence. School shooters can be explicitly driven by ideology. However, it's more common that US school shooters are not explicitly motivated by violent extremism, but do espouse violent extremist ideas. This is a photo of Nicholas Cruz, and he is a good example of this. So violent extremism was not identified as one of his motives for carrying out his attack at Marjorie Douglas Stoneman High School, but he made several comments and social media posts that were anti-Black, anti-Semitic, and reportedly he held admiration for Hitler and Nazis. There's no one factor that can predict who will get involved in violent extremism or who will carry out a school shooting. However, many of the common factors that make someone vulnerable to violent extremism, such as trauma exposure or having few healthy pro-social relationships, are also documented among school shooters. Furthermore, school shooters and violent extremists demonstrate many of the same observable warning behaviors, such as leakage. These examples really illustrate how school-centric violent extremism can be in the United States and illustrate why schools should be part of US prevention and intervention efforts. In addition, I think it's really important to mention that US children and families often depend on schools to provide them with consistent access to a wide range of services, including mental health services. The CDC also reports that US schools have direct contact with 95% of American youth. Schools are where kids are. It's where we build meaningful relationships and community with them and their families. That contact and the relationships that come from it are some of the most powerful tools that we have. So what can schools do to prevent violent extremism, and how can we, as researchers, practitioners, and policymakers, support them? This is not shocking information, but one of the most urgent needs is training for school staff on violent extremism. This is absolutely crucial for countering misinformation and for helping US staff, in particular, gain a better understanding of the threat of violent extremism, not just in global context, but in our local and national contexts. It will also ensure that our prevention efforts don't harm marginalized students, as we learned after 9/11 and the documented impact that this had on Muslim American student experiences in the United States. This training will also help staff understand the risk factors that can make someone vulnerable to violent extremism. And as someone whose background is in education, I would also prompt everyone here to think really deeply about how to make school staff collaborators and active participants in the development of prevention efforts. How can we show appreciation for and leverage the expertise and resources school staff bring to the table to make them feel part of this process? And when we think about what schools need to address violent extremism, I think it's really important to reflect on the fact that we, as experts in violent extremism, are really instrumental to this first part, providing a clear definition of this problem and a clear explanation of the problem. But when we talk about what staff, particularly teachers, should do when they encounter violent extremism in schools, that's where we need to be thinking about them as partners, because they know their roles, their colleagues, their students, and their expertise best. And it's our job to help them understand how the tools they have can be used to address violent extremism. So the team at the Violent Extremism Research Group and the team that worked on this paper really has kind of a twofold approach to this work. So number one, how can we emphasize the importance of intervention while also emphasizing how crucial prevention is? Yes, threat assessment teams need to be implemented in schools. Yes, we want teachers to really be able to identify those risk factors that make students and staff vulnerable to violent extremism. We also need to be working with schools to identify how we can build resiliency and recognize strengths in students and staff to help protect them from violent extremism. And number two, and I think this is really big for me as someone who has worked in schools, how can we build relationships with schools to identify where new resources are needed and where resources schools already have can be capitalized on? For instance, we know that bystander efforts are needed. We know that youth who get involved in violent extremism or who consider carrying out an attack on their school demonstrate observable behaviors before they carry out this attack. And when those behaviors are reported, intervention can happen. However, what's important for everyone here to know is that schools may already use bystander interventions for bullying or for suicide. And so if they already have those programs in place, are we having a conversation with them about how well those programs work and how well received they are by the community? For instance, what improvements can be made? I would imagine that some students might have some feelings about potentially reporting on their friends, or that teachers might be worried about what it would mean to report a student and how that might affect their relationship with them later. From the prevention side of things, it will be important to identify what programs focused on socio-emotional development or relevant curricula already exists in schools. For example, many schools have programs to support healthy emotional regulation, or they provide small counseling groups to students who are struggling with social skills and relationships. So it's really important to look at those and then also to think about what needs to be created, and particularly the expertise that you all bring to thinking about creating programs about online safety, media literacy, or just recognizing violent extremism on the internet. These are just two brief examples from our paper. But again, I would say that the key here is just really understanding what we bring to the table, what schools bring to the table, and how we can work in true partnership and collaboration to tackle this issue. And then that's my email if you're interested in our paper. Thank you so much.